Okay, folks, buckle up because today we're taking a deep dive into, well, the future of energy. And who better to be our guide than OPEC, right?
OPEC.
Yeah, the oil kings themselves with their World Oil Outlook 2050 report. I gotta say, I'm always up for a good prediction, especially when it comes to something as, well, massive and important as global energy, you know? And let me tell you, this report, it is chock full of data.
It really is.
So we're talking population booms, economic shifts, the rise of renewables, the role of oil. It's a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. And you can't underestimate the significance
Yeah.
of a report like this coming from OPEC. I mean, this isn't just some think tank.
Right.
They're the heavy hitters. And when they talk, the energy world listens. They've got their fingers on the pulse of the global energy market. It's really impressive, the scope of this report. They're taking the long view, looking ahead all the way to 2050, a whole generation out.
Yeah, to 2050.
And they're not just looking at oil, they're considering all forms of energy. But, what really stands out are the two big themes woven throughout this whole thing.
All right.
First, how do we ensure energy security for everyone? And second, how do we navigate this massive energy transition without, completely wrecking the planet?
Yeah, those are the million-dollar questions for sure.
Absolutely.
And they jump right into it with some, well, pretty mind-blowing population stats.
Oh, yeah.
They're projecting, get this, a global population of 9.7 billion by 2050.
It's incredible.
That's like adding another 2 Chinas to the planet.
It's hard to even fathom.
And then on top of that, imagine two-thirds of all those people crammed into cities.
Wow.
That is urbanization on steroids.
It really
Megacities everywhere. Oh, and did I mention, they're also predicting almost 870 million new people entering the global workforce by 2050.
That's huge.
That's like adding the entire U.S. workforce twice over.
It's massive. And you can see how all of this growth, it all adds up to one thing, a massive surge in energy demand.
Okay, so let's talk about that because, you're talking about billions more people all needing energy to power their homes, their businesses, their lives. So how much are we actually talking about here? What does OPEC say?
Well, they're projecting global energy demand to surge by a jaw-dropping 24% by 2050.
24%. So like a quarter more energy than we're using right now.
That's right. And here's the kicker. Almost all of that growth, we're talking the vast majority, it's coming from developing nations, what OPEC calls the non-OECD countries.
Okay, for those of us who didn't exactly major in economics, could you break down what non-OECD actually means?
Yeah, no problem. It basically refers to countries that aren't part of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is largely made up of wealthy, industrialized nations.
Got it.
So think of it as the difference between, say, the U.S. and Germany on one hand, and countries like China, India, and Brazil on the other.
Okay, so the up-and-coming economies.
Exactly. The non-OECD world is where the population and economic growth are really exploding, and that translates into a huge need for energy, a lot more energy.
It's like a global energy shift is happening right before our eyes.
It really is.
And speaking of shifts, there's this phrase in the report that caught my eye. OPEC talks about ensuring just and inclusive future energy pathways for all?
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Like, in plain English?
It means they're not just thinking about how to meet this, crazy energy demand. They're thinking about doing it fairly. It's about making sure everyone on the planet, regardless of where they live or how much money they have, has access to affordable and reliable energy sources, especially as we, hopefully move towards a cleaner energy future.
I like the sound of that. No one gets left behind, right?
Exactly. Everyone's got a seat at the table in this energy revolution.
Okay, so we've got the WHO, a planet absolutely bursting with people needing more and more energy. But let's get down to brass tacks here. How much energy are we actually talking about? Give me the numbers.
Well, OPEC's predicting a whopping 24% surge in global energy demand by 2050.
Wow, 24%. That's a crazy jump.
It's like taking all the power plants, all the oil rigs, all the solar panels in the world right now and needing almost a quarter more just to keep up.
That's mind-boggling. And I'm guessing, just like with the population growth, this demand isn't exactly spread evenly across the globe, is it?
You got it. It's those non-OECD countries, again, driving the lion's share of this increase. They're projected to account for a massive 73.5 million barrels of oil equivalent per day.
Wow. 73.5. What does that even look like?
Think of it this way. It's like adding the entire energy consumption of the United States. Twice.
No way.
Yeah. Meanwhile, demand in the wealthier OECD countries, that's us, by the way,
Mm.
is actually projected to slightly decrease.
Huh. Interesting. So while we're like trying to cut back on our energy use, other parts of the world are just getting started, basically.
In a nutshell, yeah,
Wow. That changes things.
it really does.
And speaking of other parts of the world, the report actually singles out India, saying they alone will account for a full 30% of that non-OECD energy demand growth.
30%.
30%. It's like they're on a mission to use all the energy.
It's remarkable growth, no doubt.
So all this talk about solar panels and wind turbines and electric cars, you'd think OPEC would be, like, predicting the end of fossil fuels, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Well, get this.
They're not.
Wait, seriously?
Seriously.
Yeah.
In fact, they're projecting oil and gas will still make up over half, we're talking 53% of the global energy mix by 2050.
53%. But I thought renewables were supposed to, like, take over.
That's the thing. 53% might not sound like a lot, but when you consider the total amount of energy we're talking about, it's still a massive chunk. And it really highlights that this isn't a simple case of one energy source replacing another.
Right.
It's more like this rising tide that's lifting all boats, you know?
Okay.
Even with the incredible growth we're seeing in renewables, it's clear we're still going to need a lot of oil and gas just to keep pace with this insane demand.
It's like trying to outrun a cheetah, but on a treadmill. You're moving, but that cheetah is gaining on you.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, so maybe those gas stations aren't going extinct anytime soon. But hold on a second, I'm confused. You're saying that we need a lot more energy and that a lot of that will still be oil and gas, even though renewables are growing like crazy.
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does. So how does that even work?
It's about the bigger picture. It's not just one fuel replacing another. It's about all energy sources growing to meet this massive demand. See, even with the impressive growth of renewables, we're not phasing out fossil fuels anytime soon. They will continue to play a vital role in the global energy mix for decades to come.
Okay, so like a rising tide lifts all ships, even the oil tankers.
Exactly. And speaking of oil, I know you're curious about what OPEC has to say about their, shall we say, bread and butter.
And yeah, let's get down to it. What's that look on oil specifically? I mean, this is OPEC after all.
Right, well, brace yourself, because they're predicting oil demand will actually keep growing, reaching a staggering 120 million barrels per day by 2050.
Wait, 120 million barrels a day? Seriously?
Seriously. It seems like the rumors of oil's demise have been greatly exaggerated.
Wow. I mean, with all the talk about moving away from fossil fuels and towards renewables, you'd think oil demand would be dropping. What's driving this continued growth?
It all comes back to that regional divide we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
See, even though oil demand in developed economies, those OECD countries, is projected to decrease by 2050.
Right.
The growth in developing nations, those non-OECD countries, is more than making up for it. They're experiencing rapid industrialization, urbanization, and population growth, all of which are fueling this insatiable demand for oil.
So it's like this tug of war with developing nations pulling hard on the oil rope.
Yeah, you could say that.
But what are they using all this oil for? I mean, is it just population growth?
Population plays a big role, of course, but it's not the whole story. Think about all the stuff we use every day that comes from oil plastics, fertilizers, cosmetics, even some medicines.
Oh, right.
That whole industry is called petrochemicals, and it's booming, especially in Asia.
Right, right. So, like, we can't forget about, like, the plastic flamingo in everyone's future living room.
Exactly. And on top of that, we have transportation.
Ah, right. Cars.
Yes, cars. Even with the rise of electric vehicles, OPEC predicts the global vehicle fleet will nearly double by 2050.
Double. Are you serious?
So much for less traffic, huh?
It seems that way. And here's the kicker. They expect internal combustion engines, the ones that run on gasoline or diesel, to still make up 70% of all vehicles in 2050. Wow. 70%. So gas guzzlers are here to stay, at least for a while.
According to OPEC, yes. And that has huge implications, because it means we're going to need a lot of oil refineries. And not just any refineries, we're going to need ones that can churn out lighter types of fuel. Things like naphtha, which is used in petrochemicals, and of course, diesel and gasoline for all those cars.
Okay, so this is a lot to wrap our heads around. We've got oil demand going up even as we're trying to transition to cleaner energy. But if we're going to need all this oil, where's it going to come from?
That is the million-dollar question.
They don't just magic it out of thin air, do they?
No.
What does OPEC say about the supply side of things?
Well, that's where Chapter 4 of the report gets really interesting. They dive into what they call liquid supply, which is basically anything that can be pumped from the ground.
So we're talking about crude oil, but also things like natural gas liquids.
Exactly. And the outlook is Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag.
A mixed bag, huh? Sounds ominous.
Well,